They were so sure she had nothing left. They pictured her walking in with her head down, sitting where they put her, watching the man who threw her away marry someone richer and younger. Beatrice Ashford had personally chosen the worst seat in the house for her, a folding chair jammed against the service corridor where the caterers came and went. She wanted the ex-wife to sweat in the heat of the kitchen and feel every second of it. What she did not know was that Nora was not arriving alone. When the doors of the estate swung open, Nora did not come in weeping. She came in with two small girls holding her hands, two little faces that carried her ex-husband's exact features, and the secret she had guarded for 4 years was about to take a wedding that cost $500,000 and set it on fire. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. It was thick, ivory, lined in gold tissue, and it carried a perfume that Nora recognized before she even opened it. Sandalwood and old money. Beatrice Ashford wore that scent like armor, and the smell of it landed in Nora's stomach like a cold stone. For a moment she was 26 again, standing in a marble hallway while a woman she had tried so hard to please looked at her the way a person looks at a stain on the carpet. She stood in the front room of her home in Pacific Heights, San Francisco, the whole bay spread out gray and shining behind the tall windows. She turned the envelope over twice. The lettering was perfect, of course. Everything the Ashfords touched was perfect on the surface. Julian Ashford and Camille Devereaux request the pleasure of your company. Nora let out a short laugh with no humor in it. Julian, the man who had once written her a letter promising he would choose her over everyone. Julian, who had sat silent at a dining table while his mother listed all the ways Nora would never be good enough. Julian, who had signed the divorce papers without meeting her eyes and let his mother slide a settlement across the desk like she was tipping a valet. "Mama, who's that from?" Nora looked down. Wren, one of her 4-year-old twins, was pulling at the hem of her sweater with a marker still capped in her other hand. Behind her, in the living room, Juniper was arranging every couch cushion into a tower she called a castle. The girls had Julian's dark hair and his slate-colored eyes, the kind of gray that turned almost silver in strong light. But everything else was Nora, the set of the mouth, the way they lifted their chins when they wanted something, the refusal to be told no. "Nobody you need to worry about, Bug," Nora said, and she smoothed Wren's hair back. "Go help your sister. She's going to knock that whole thing over on her own." She carried the invitation into the kitchen and dropped it on the island. Her assistant, a sharp woman named Priya, who had been with her since the company had exactly 3 employees, glanced up from her tablet and read the gold lettering upside down. "Let me guess," Priya said. "The Ashfords." "His mother," Nora said. She poured herself a glass of water she did not really want, just to have something to do with her hands. "Julian is getting married again, next Saturday, up at the family place on the coast near Big Sur, and I am cordially invited." Priya set the tablet down. "Didn't they escort you off that property with 1 suitcase and a check they clearly thought was generous?" "They did." Nora almost smiled at the memory of how young and frightened she had been. "Beatrice wants me to come and look at everything I lost. She wants me to see Julian marry Camille Devereaux, whose father used to be an ambassador and whose family has been rich since before there were cars. That is the daughter-in-law Beatrice always wanted. And in her head, I am still the girl who waited tables at a diner off the highway and could barely make rent." Priya tilted her head. "She has no idea what you are now, does she?" "None." Nora walked to the window. 4 years ago, she had driven away from that estate at 2 in the morning in a car with a check engine light that never went off, pregnant and terrified and absolutely alone. She had never told Julian about the babies. What would have been the point? Beatrice had already decided Nora was a schemer who had trapped her son on purpose. If that woman had learned there were children coming, she would have buried Nora in lawyers and DNA petitions before the twins ever drew breath. She would have made sure Nora got nothing and fought for everything. So Nora ran. She scraped by. She lived in a 1-bedroom with 2 cribs and a folding table, and she cried in the shower where the girls could not hear her. Then slowly, she stopped scraping and started climbing. She took the last of her savings and put a down payment on a failing bed and breakfast in Sonoma that everyone told her was a money pit. She fixed it herself in the hours the twins slept. She learned the business by living inside it. That one property became 2. 2 became a small chain of design-forward boutique hotels that travel writers could not stop talking about. Then a hospitality fund noticed her, and then a bigger one, and by the time the twins turned 4, Nora Kessler was the founder and chief executive of Marlowe Hospitality Group, with properties in 9 cities and a personal fortune that would have made Beatrice Ashford choke on her morning tea. Her phone buzzed on the counter, an unknown number. "Hope the invite reached you. Figured a free dinner might be nice for a change. It's formal, so do your best with what you've got." Nora stared at the words. It was not Julian. Julian had been a coward, but he had never been cruel on purpose. Cruelty that specific, that dressed up as kindness, only came from one person. "They think we're starving," Nora said quietly, and a slow, dangerous calm settled over her face. Priya knew that expression. It was the one Nora wore right before she signed a deal that changed the shape of a market. "Nora, what are you thinking?" Nora picked the invitation back up. She ran a fingernail along the embossed date. "They want a performance. They invited the ex-wife so they could put her in a corner and enjoy watching her hurt." She turned to look through the doorway at her daughters, who were now both buried in the cushioned castle and shrieking with laughter. 2 little heirs to the Ashford name, hidden away for 4 full years. "Priya, clear my Saturday. Call the stylist. I need a dress. No, I need something that walks into a room and ends the conversation before I open my mouth." "And the girls?" Priya asked. Nora watched Wren crown Juniper with a pillow. "Get them fitted for something beautiful. If Beatrice Ashford wants a family reunion, then it is time she met her granddaughters." The estate was called Cliffmore, and it sat on a shelf of land where the coast dropped straight down to the ocean. Nora remembered every stone of it. It was grand and cold, and built to make visitors feel small. The lawns were cut to the millimeter. A white tent, the size of a chapel, had gone up near the cliff edge, wrapped in thousands of pale roses, and lit from inside so it glowed. It was the kind of display that was less about a wedding and more about a scoreboard. Inside the main house, in a bedroom that had been hers once, Beatrice Ashford adjusted a rope of pearls at her throat and studied herself in a tall mirror. She was 63, though the surgeon in the city had shaved a good decade off her face. Her eyes were the only honest thing left, and they were the eyes of something that hunted for a living. "Is she here yet?" Beatrice said without turning. Julian stood at the window in his tuxedo, a glass of scotch untouched in his hand. He looked older than his years and thinner than he should have been. "I don't know, Mother, and I still don't understand why we invited her. It feels petty." "It feels correct," Beatrice said. "It is a reminder. Camille is flawless. She comes from the right people. She will open doors for this family that we badly need opened. Nora was a mistake I cleaned up. I want you to see her today in her cheap dress with her tired face, and I want you to feel in your bones the favor I did you." "She hasn't replied," Julian said. "Maybe she won't come." "She'll come." Beatrice fastened an earring. Women like her never turn down free champagne and a chance to breathe the same air as their betters. "I've seated her by the service door, table 22. She smiled at her own reflection. Close enough to smell the food she can't afford. Julian looked out at the guests arriving. Bentleys and vintage Jaguars crawled up the drive. He loved Camille, or he thought he did. She was elegant and certain of herself, and she had never once made him feel like he was disappointing his mother. But some small, buried part of him still thought about the girl who used to laugh so hard at his terrible jokes that she cried. The girl he had let his mother drive out of his life while he stood there and did nothing. 2 miles down the coast road, 3 black Range Rovers moved toward Cliffmore in a tight line. In the lead vehicle, Nora sat very still, ankles crossed, hands folded. She wore a gown in deep oxblood, a color like wine held up to firelight, cut clean and severe with a low back. Her hair was pulled into a smooth twist. A single line of diamonds lay at her collarbone. She looked like she owned the road, the coast, and the ocean beyond it. Beside her sat the reason she had come. Wren and Juniper were strapped into their seats in matching dresses, Wren in soft gray and Juniper in the palest blue tiny patent shoes swinging inches above the floor mat. They looked like they had walked out of a painting. "Okay, my loves," Nora said. "What did we practice?" "Manners," Wren said. "No running," Juniper added. "Hold hands," they finished together. Perfect. Nora reached over and straightened Juniper's collar. You don't have to talk to anyone you don't want to. You stay with me. If you get scared, you squeeze my hand and I will get you out of there so fast you'll think you flew. The lead car slowed at the security gate. A guard with a clipboard leaned toward the window as the driver rolled it down. Name, the guard said. Kessler, the driver answered. Nora Kessler. The guard ran a finger down his list and frowned. I have a Kessler down for overflow parking lot C. There's a shuttle. Nora touched a button and her window slid down. She lowered her sunglasses and looked at the man over the top of them. Open the gate, she said. Her voice was quiet and even, and it carried the flat authority of a person who has not been told no by anyone in a very long time. The guard opened his mouth, closed it, and waved them through. The convoy rolled up the gravel drive, and heads began to turn on the lawn. Guests holding flutes of champagne stopped mid-sentence. Nobody arrived at Cliffmore in a 3-car detail. The Range Rovers pulled to a stop directly in front of the garden entrance, the spot reserved for the wedding party. A planner with a headset came hurrying across the grass. Excuse me, you can't stop here. This area is reserved. The driver ignored him, stepped around the hood, and opened the rear door. A hush spread out across the lawn like a dropped stone in still water. Up on the terrace, Beatrice Ashford had just stepped out with a fresh glass of champagne. She narrowed her eyes at the cars below. Who on earth is that? Said the woman beside her, the wife of a real estate developer. A pair of dark heels stepped onto the gravel. Then Nora rose out of the car and stood to her full height, smoothing the oxblood silk down her hip. She was not the wet-eyed girl they had thrown out of this house. She looked like something out of a magazine cover, and the guests fell quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the bride they had come to see. Whispers moved through the crowd. Then Nora turned back to the car and put out her hand. Come on, sweethearts, one at a time. Wren climbed down first, then Juniper. And when the 2 little girls stepped into the light and looked up, blinking, at the great white house, a low sound moved through the guests, a collective intake of breath. The dark hair, the shape of the jaw, and those eyes, that unusual slate gray that turned to silver in the sun. Anyone who had ever looked at Julian Ashford knew those eyes. On the terrace, Beatrice's champagne glass slipped out of her fingers and shattered on the stone. The sound cracked through the silence like a rifle shot. Julian had just stepped out behind his mother. He gripped the terrace railing, and every drop of color drained from his face. He looked at the girls, then at Nora, then back at the girls, and Nora watched the math land on him. 4 years. His mouth moved, but nothing came out. Nora crouched to fix the little bow on Juniper's shoe. Then she stood, took both girls by the hand, and lifted her eyes to the terrace. She found Julian. She found Beatrice. She did not smile. She did not wave. She simply held them there in a long, cool, steady look, the kind that says, I have been waiting a long time for this. And then she turned and began to walk toward the tent. The crowd parted for her. Mama, Wren said, loud enough to carry in the silence, pointing up at the terrace. Is that man crying? Don't point, baby, Nora said gently and kept walking. We're just here to watch. She did not go anywhere near table 22 by the service door. She walked straight down the center aisle of the tent to the front row, to the seat set aside for the groom's family. A young usher stepped into her path, pale and sweating. Ma'am, I'm sorry. These seats are for immediate family only. Nora looked down at him, then at her 2 daughters, who were staring at the flower-covered arch at the front with open boredom. I promise you, she said, her voice soft and edged like a good knife. There is no one in this tent closer to the groom than his own children. She sat, and before the first note of music played, the most expensive wedding on the coast that year began to come apart at the seams. The front row was a wall of held breath. Senators, tech founders, old shipping money, all of them pretending to read their programs while every ear strained toward the woman in oxblood and the 2 small girls swinging their feet beside her. Beatrice did not walk down from the terrace. She marched. Her heels struck the stone path like hammer blows. She reached the end of the front row where Nora sat and leaned in close, and under the expensive powder her face was purple. What is the meaning of this? She hissed. How dare you? I invited you here to sit in the back and remember your place, not to make a spectacle at my son's wedding." Nora did not flinch. She reached over and brushed a stray thread off Wren's shoulder. "Hello, Beatrice. You look tense. Everything all right? Get out. Right now. Take these children and go before I have you carried out." "I don't think I will," Nora said, and finally looked up. Her eyes were calm. "You sent me an invitation. I have the confirmation on my phone. And if you want to have 2 guards drag a woman and 2 toddlers out of a wedding in front of every important person on this coast, please be my guest. I have very good lawyers, and I would love to introduce them to you." Beatrice's gaze slid, against her own will, to the little girls. She could not help it. The resemblance hit her like a slap. "Who are they?" "They came with me," Nora said simply. Just then Julian appeared at the top of the aisle. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. He stopped a few feet away and stared at the twins with his mouth slightly open. Juniper, the braver of the two, looked up at him and tilted her head to one side, a small unconscious gesture that was so exactly his own that a woman 2 rows back pressed a hand to her mouth. "Mama," Juniper said, tugging Nora's sleeve, "he does the head thing like me." Julian made a sound like he had been hit in the chest. "Nora." His voice came out cracked and thin. Every trace of the arrogance he had worn 4 years ago was gone. "Nora, who are they?" Nora let her voice rise just enough for the first 3 rows to catch every word. "These are the daughters you decided you didn't want, Julian. Except you never actually decided that, because you never knew. You were too busy signing papers and moving on to notice that your wife left carrying twins." The word twins traveled backward through the tent like wind through grass. "I didn't know," Julian whispered. He looked at Wren, then at Juniper, and he saw his own face looking back at him twice. "I swear to God I didn't know." "How old are they?" someone in the second row breathed. 4, Nora said, still looking at Julian. "They turned 4 in March. You can do the arithmetic yourself, or I can wait." "It's a con," Beatrice cut in, loud and sharp, planting herself between Julian and the girls. Her hand clamped around her son's arm. "Julian, don't be a fool. She hired them. She found 2 children who happened to have dark hair and dressed them up to ruin your wedding. She is a bitter, jealous woman, and this is exactly the kind of thing a person like her would do." Wren looked up at Beatrice with a small, deep frown, her eyebrows pulling together in a way that was pure Ashford, and she said very clearly to her sister, "That lady is mean." The 2 girls giggled. Beatrice went still. She had seen that exact frown 1,000 times. She had seen it on her late husband's face across 40 years of dinners. It was not a thing you could hire. "Start the ceremony." Beatrice barked at no one and everyone. "Julian, to the front. Now. And you." She turned back to Nora, her voice dropping to something venomous. "If you make one sound during my son's vows, I will spend every dollar I have making the rest of your life a misery." Nora smiled, and it did not reach her eyes. "You don't have that many dollars left, Beatrice, but we'll get to that." The organ began. Beatrice practically shoved Julian toward the arch. He walked to his place, but he did not face the aisle to wait for his bride. He faced the front row, and he could not stop looking at the 2 little girls. The great doors at the back of the tent opened, and Camille Devereaux appeared on her father's arm. She was stunning, wrapped in a river of ivory silk with a train that took 2 attendants to manage. But as she began her walk, she felt something was wrong. At a wedding, every eye is supposed to be on the bride. Instead, half the guests had their heads turned to the front row, craning to look at a woman in dark red and 2 small girls. Camille's smile stayed fixed for the cameras, but her eyes darted. Why was Julian staring past her? Who were those children? She reached the arch. Julian took her hands. His palms were soaking wet, and he was trembling. "Are you all right?" she whispered. "Yes," he said, and he looked like he might be sick. The officiant, an old family friend of the Ashfords, began the opening words. They rang hollow in the tight, humming air. Then came the pause before the vows, and the whole tent went silent except for the sound of the ocean below the cliff. "I'm bored," Wren announced, in the clear, flat voice of a 4-year-old in a quiet room. "Shh, bug," Nora murmured, and pulled a small bag of crackers from her clutch. The crinkle of the wrapper was deafening. Across the aisle, Beatrice caught the eye of a security guard standing in the shadows near the tent wall and drew a finger sharply across her own throat. "Get them out." The big man started forward. Nora saw him coming and did not flinch. She simply stood. The movement rippled through the crowd, and half of them assumed she was rising to object to the wedding itself. "Sit down," Beatrice hissed, half out of her own chair now. Nora ignored her. She held up one hand toward the guard, stopping him where he stood, and then she looked directly at Julian. "Julian," she said. She did not shout. She did not need to. "Your mother has sent a man to physically remove your children from your wedding. 2 4-year-old girls. Is that really how you want to start your new marriage? By throwing your own daughters out of a party, the same way you threw out their mother?" The officiant stopped speaking. Camille dropped Julian's hands. "Children," she repeated, her voice climbing. "Julian, what is she talking about?" "She's lying," Beatrice shrieked, on her feet now. "She is a compulsive liar. Guards, remove her." "She's not lying." The voice came from the back of the tent, calm and clear and female. Every head turned. A tall woman in a simple black dress was walking up the aisle. She had the same dark hair as Julian, gone silver at the temples, and the same gray eyes. She was perhaps 45, and she moved like someone who had stopped being afraid of the family a long time ago. Beatrice went white. "Vivian." "Hello, Mother," said the woman. "You didn't invite me. I heard about it anyway." Vivian Ashford, Julian's older sister, the one who had walked away from the family years back and never looked at Cliffmore again, came to a stop beside the front row and looked down at the twins for a long moment. Something in her face broke open. "Aunt who?" Wren asked Nora, who was as surprised as anyone. "My God," Vivian said quietly. "Junie. That's what you'd call her, isn't it? She's the image of the photograph of me at 4. The one that used to hang in the East Hall before Mother took it down." She turned to the crowd, her voice steady and carrying. "I don't know this woman. I have never met her. But I would know these children anywhere. That is my brother's face on both of them, and that little one has the exact frown my father had. You cannot hire that. You cannot coach that into a child. Those girls are Ashfords, and everyone in this tent can see it." The silence that followed was total. Camille took a step back, and then another. Her veil trembled. She looked into Julian's eyes, the eyes she had thought she loved, and then down at the 2 little girls with those same eyes, and the truth settled onto her like a weight. "You have children," she whispered. "Twins. And you never told me." "I didn't know," Julian said, and now he was openly crying, his whole polished surface gone. "She left. She just left. My mother told me she took money and left." "I left," Nora said, and her voice was clear as glass, "because your mother stood in the hallway of this house and told me I was a mistake she intended to erase. Because she told me you had never really loved me, and that she would use every lawyer money could buy to take my babies and raise them to be exactly like her. I was pregnant. I was scared. I made a choice to protect my daughters from this family, and I do not regret it for 1 second." She looked down at the twins, who had finished the crackers and were now watching a butterfly bump against the tent wall, blissfully unaware that they had just detonated a dynasty. "I didn't come here to stop a wedding," Nora said, and it was almost true. "I came because your mother demanded a show. Well, she got one." Camille's father, the former Ambassador Devereaux, rose from his seat, and his face was thunderous. He strode to the arch, took his weeping daughter by the shoulders, and turned to glare at Julian. "You humiliated her," he said, low and furious. "In front of everyone we know. You have a secret family, and you let my daughter walk down that aisle toward it." "They are not a secret anymore," Nora said, her voice ringing out. "And they are not illegitimate before anyone reaches for that word. They were born inside a legal marriage, which means, under the law, they are Julian Ashford's rightful heirs, and they are entitled to a very substantial share of everything this family owns." A choked gasp came from Beatrice. She groped for the back of a chair and lowered herself into it, one hand pressed to her chest. Not one person moved to help her. They were all watching the wreck. Camille pulled the veil off her head. "I can't do this," she said. "I won't. I am not going to become the stepmother to twins on my own wedding day. I am not spending my life tied to your ex-wife." She gathered up the great skirt of her dress in both hands and ran back up the aisle, sobbing, her parents storming out behind her, shooting looks of pure poison at the Ashfords. The tent erupted. Phones came out. Somewhere in the chaos, a hashtag was already being born. Julian stood alone under the arch of roses, ruined. Nora checked the thin watch on her wrist. "Well," she said to no one in particular, "that went faster than I expected." She stood and took her daughters by the hands. "Girls, say bye to your father." "Bye," said Juniper, waving a cracker-dusted hand. Nora turned, and the oxblood silk turned with her, and she walked back up the aisle toward the light with a child on each side. She did not hurry, she did not look back. She was halfway to the cars when Julian's voice broke behind her. "Nora, please, don't take them. Not again." He came off the platform and ran across the lawn, his shined shoes tearing up the grass. Nora stopped. She did not turn right away. She signaled her driver to keep the engine running, and she nodded to Priya, who had appeared beside the middle car, to help the twins climb in. "Go with Auntie Priya for a minute," she said softly. "Mama just needs to finish something." "Is the sad man okay?" Wren asked, peering back at Julian, who had skidded to a stop on the gravel and was fighting for breath. "He'll be fine, baby. In you go. There's a movie on the iPad." The heavy door shut, and the girls were sealed inside the quiet of the car. Julian stood a few feet away, chest heaving, hair a mess, and stared at the tinted windows like they held the whole world. "Are they really mine?" he said. "They are mine," Nora said, turning to face him. "I carried them. I gave birth to them alone in a hospital where no one came to visit. I sat up with them through fevers and croup and every nightmare they ever had. You were a name on a birth certificate I chose not to fill in. I would have been there," Julian said, and his voice cracked. "If I had known Nora, I swear I would have been there." "If you had known," Nora said, "your mother would have had a court order for prenatal testing before I hit my second trimester. She would have dragged me through hearing after hearing. She would have made me so sick with stress I might have lost them both. I was not going to gamble my daughters' lives against your family's pride." She let that land. "So no, you would not have been there. You would have watched from behind your mother, the way you always did." Beatrice arrived then, one guard supporting her elbow. She was not shouting anymore. She was breathing hard, but her eyes had gone cold and calculating again, and Nora recognized the shift. The shark had smelled money. Beatrice's gaze moved over the Range Rovers, the private detail, the diamonds, and something behind her eyes recalibrated. "You hid my grandchildren," Beatrice said low. "You stole the Ashford heirs." "I protected my daughters from a toxic house," Nora said. "There's a difference, and every judge in this state would see it." Beatrice straightened her spine and smoothed the front of her dress. "Well, the secret is out now. You cannot keep them from us. They are Ashfords. They belong here. They need to be raised properly, with the right schools and the right people, not in some apartment with a woman playing dress-up." "They live in a house in Pacific Heights with a view of the Golden Gate," Nora said. "They're doing fine." Beatrice gave a thin smile. "Let's not play games, dear. I know your type. You are living on credit cards and the settlement we gave you, pretending at all this. But lawsuits are expensive. Custody battles are ruinous." She reached into her clutch and drew out a slim checkbook and a gold pen. It was a move she had made 100 times, and it had worked every one of them. "So let's be practical. I will write you a check right now for $4 million. In exchange, you sign primary custody to Julian. You can have supervised visits. Holidays, perhaps." Julian stared at his mother in horror. "Mother, you can't buy them." "Be quiet, Julian. I am fixing your mess." Beatrice clicked the pen. $4 million, Nora. That's a fresh start for a girl like you. Find a nice man in your own bracket. Leave the raising of Ashford heirs to people who know how." Nora looked at the checkbook, and then she laughed. Not bitterly. She laughed like something was actually funny. 4 million, she said, wiping the corner of her eye. Beatrice, that's adorable. Beatrice's smile tightened. 6 then, and don't test me. Nora stepped in close enough that her own perfume overwhelmed the sandalwood and the champagne. Beatrice, I closed a deal on Thursday afternoon that cleared more than 6 million before my second coffee. My company just acquired a resort group in Baja. My net worth is somewhere north of $180 million, and it goes up every quarter. She reached out and slid the checkbook gently out of Beatrice's frozen hand, then patted her once on the cheek with it. I don't want your money. I could buy Cliffmore, knock it into the sea, and never notice the dip in my accounts. Keep your little check. You are going to need it for lawyers. She turned to Julian, whose jaw had come loose. You wanted a wedding, she said. You got a funeral. Goodbye, Julian. She climbed into the car. Nora! Julian called out, striking the glass with the flat of his hand as the engine took hold. Nora, please, I just want to know them. The car did not stop. It rolled down the long drive and left the Ashfords standing in the ruins of their perfect afternoon in a cloud of settling dust. The fallout came fast. By Monday, the story was everywhere. Photos of the twins in their little dresses were on the front of every gossip site on the coast. Secret Ashford twins crash society wedding, the ex-wife's revenge. Nora's phone did not stop, but she had a public relations team for exactly this, and she spent Monday morning in her office reviewing occupancy numbers for the Baja properties while the storm raged outside her control. Beatrice, humiliated and stripped bare in front of everyone whose opinion she cared about, did the only thing she knew how to do. She attacked. On Wednesday, Nora was served. It was an emergency petition for custody, Ashford versus Kessler. Beatrice and Julian were suing for primary custody, and the filing accused Nora of fraud, of alienating the children from their father, and of being an unfit mother for concealing their existence. It was a thin case built on spite, but Beatrice had never won by being right. She won by making the fight so long and so expensive that the other side gave up. She hired the meanest family litigation firm in the state, Holloway and Reese. Nora read the papers at her desk with a green juice at her elbow. They want a war, she said. The deposition is set for Friday, Priya said, checking the calendar. At their offices downtown. They want you to come to them. It's a power play. They want to pull you off your own turf. And deliberately concealed the existence of 2 children from their biological father for over 4 years. I admit, Nora said, calm, looking straight through him at Beatrice, that I fiercely protected my daughters from a family with a long and well-documented history of cruelty. Objection, Holloway said. Speculation. It's not speculation, Nora said, and she nodded to Daniel, who slid a set of stapled documents across the polished table. It's the public record. Beatrice Ashford's first divorce filing, 2 restraining orders, and sworn statements from 3 former staff members of Cliffmore describing the way the children of that house were disciplined. Beatrice stiffened. That is completely irrelevant. Is it? Nora said. We're here to talk about the welfare of children. A family court judge might find it very relevant that the grandmother petitioning for custody once had a housekeeper testify that she locked a small boy in a dark pantry for hours as a lesson. Julian's head snapped toward his mother. You did that. To me. I remember the pantry. I told myself I dreamed it. She's lying, Beatrice said too fast. I have the affidavit, Nora said cold and even. From Rosa, your old housekeeper Julian, the one you loved. The one your mother fired the year you turned 6 because she decided Rosa was too soft on you. Julian had gone gray. He remembered Rosa. He remembered crying under his bed for a week after she vanished without a word. This is defamation, Holloway said, trying to steer the room back. The relevant point stands. The Ashford family can offer these children opportunities their mother simply cannot. Legacy, connection, the finest schools. What can you offer, Ms. Kessler? You run hotels. Nora laughed, and the sound echoed off the glass walls. Yes, I run hotels. She leaned forward. Here's a fun fact, Mr. Holloway. Do you know who bought the Ashford family's flagship property last spring? The old Marchmont Hotel your clients quietly put on the market when they ran out of cash? My company did, through a holding entity, so no one would notice. I own it. I renovated it. It reopens next month." She let that sit. "And do you know who holds the note on Cliffmore itself, after your clients took out a second mortgage last year to keep the lights on?" The room was silent. "I do," Nora said. "I bought the debt in April. Your clients are not American royalty, Mr. Holloway. Your clients are broke. They are in debt to me personally, and they are suing me for custody because it is the only leverage they have left. This was never about loving those little girls. Beatrice has never once met them. This is about the trust fund the children would inherit from the late Mr. Ashford's estate, which the family cannot touch unless the children live under an Ashford roof." Julian turned slowly to look at his mother. "Is that true? Is that why you filed? For the trust?" Beatrice did not look at him. She stared straight ahead, and her manicured hands were trembling on the table. "I have an offer," Nora said, and she stood and walked slowly around the table until she was standing behind Julian's chair. "I don't want your money. God knows I don't need it." "We don't want your filthy money either," Beatrice spat. "This isn't for you," Nora said. She rested one hand on Julian's shoulder, and he flinched, then went still. "Julian, I am going to let you see the girls." Julian looked up, and there was something desperate and young in his face. "On my terms," Nora said. "No lawyers, no Beatrice, ever. You fly to San Francisco. You get a hotel, not one of mine, and you see them at my house, or in the park near my house, with me present, for as long as it takes for them to know you as their dad, instead of a stranger who cries. If that goes well, and only if, we talk about more." "I want that," Julian whispered. "I'll do anything." "And you," Nora said, turning to point one finger at Beatrice. "You dropped this lawsuit today. You sign an agreement never to contact my daughters and never to speak about them to any reporter, ever. If you break it, this file goes straight to the district attorney." "What file?" Beatrice demanded, and her voice shook now. Nora looked at the plain gray folder on the table. "Bank records, wire transfers out of the Ashford Family Foundation, the charity, into a personal account in the Caymans. Roughly $9 million over 6 years, and a very interesting forensic report on the amendment to your late husband's will, the one that cut Vivian out. The signature doesn't match Beatrice. It never did. Vivian always suspected. Now she has proof, and so do I." Every drop of blood left Beatrice's face. Foundation fraud was not a scandal, it was federal, and forging a dead man's will was prison. "Sign the papers, Mother," Julian said quietly. He stood up out of his chair. "I mean it." "You are throwing away everything," Beatrice said. "The name, the legacy." "The legacy is 2 little girls I have never held," Julian said. "I am done being your soldier." He looked at Nora. "I'll sign whatever you want. Today, I just want to know them." Nora nodded once. "Then we have a deal." She turned toward the door, folder under her arm, then paused with her hand on the glass. "Oh, and Beatrice." The old woman looked up, small and gray in her tall chair. "The mortgage on Cliffmore, I'm not going to call it in. Not this year." Nora smiled without warmth. "You're a tenant in my house now. Do keep the gardens nice." She walked out and left the door open behind her. Her heels made a clean, even sound down the marble hall. It was the sound of a fight that was already over. The legal war ended that Friday. The harder thing came next, because introducing a father to 2 little girls who had never had one was going to be nothing like a boardroom. 2 weeks later, a soft rain fell over San Francisco, running down the tall windows of Nora's house in fat gray lines. It was nothing like the polished sunlight of the coast, and Nora loved it for exactly that reason. She stood at the kitchen island watching the numbers over the front elevator climb. 12, 14. "Is he coming up yet?" Wren asked. She was on the rug lining up her toy horses in a careful row by color, a habit that Nora privately suspected came straight from the Ashford side, though she would never say so out loud. "Almost, Bug," Nora said. Her voice was steady. Her heart was not. She had spent 2 days getting the girls ready without frightening them. She had not said your father is coming to live with us. She had said a man named Julian is coming to visit. He is your dad, and he would very much like to play with you. She kept the bar on the floor. If Julian turned out to be as cold as the house that raised him, she was not going to let her daughters be the ones who got hurt. The elevator chimed. The doors opened. Julian stepped out, and he looked like a different person. The tuxedo was gone. He wore a plain sweater and jeans that were so obviously brand new that he had clearly hired someone to buy him clothes a normal dad might wear. He carried 2 gift bags and his hands were shaking. He looked at Nora, then his eyes went past her to the living room where 2 small girls with his own gray eyes were watching him without blinking. "Hi," he said, and his voice barely held. "Take your shoes off in the entry," Nora said. "We don't wear outside shoes in here." "Of course." He fumbled with his sneakers, nearly lost his balance, set them neatly on the rack, and stepped into the room like a man walking onto ice. He stopped a few feet from the girls. Wren and Juniper stood up. They were wearing matching dinosaur pajamas because they had refused all other options that morning. Juniper studied him for a long moment. "You're the sad man from the grass," she said. "You were running." Julian let out a short, wet laugh. "Yeah, that was me. I'm Julian." He hesitated. "Your mom says I'm your dad." "Do you have a castle?" Wren asked from behind her sister, half hidden. Julian slowly lowered himself down onto one knee, then the other, until he was at their eye level. It was a small thing, and it was a thing his mother would have scolded him for. "Ashfords do not kneel," she used to say. Beatrice was not here. "I have a big house," he said, "but it's very quiet." "Why?" Juniper asked. "Because there aren't any kids in it," Julian said, and his eyes filled. "I brought you something, if that's okay." The girls looked at Nora. She gave a small nod. They tore into the bags. Inside were 2 beautiful, breakable porcelain dolls, clearly expensive and completely wrong for 2 4-year-olds who mostly played with dinosaurs and horses. Wren looked at the doll, then at Julian, then set it gently aside and picked up a plastic dinosaur instead. "Can dolls fight the T-Rex?" she asked. Julian looked at Nora, lost. Nora raised an eyebrow and said nothing. This was his to figure out. "They can," Julian said carefully, sitting down on the floor. "The doll can ride the T-Rex, like a knight." Juniper considered this and decided it was acceptable. She handed him the doll and the dinosaur and said, "You do it." For the next hour, Nora watched the strangest thing she had ever seen. The heir to the Ashford name, a man trained to run a boardroom, sat cross-legged on her living room rug with a porcelain doll riding a plastic dinosaur, being ordered around by 2 tiny generals in dinosaur pajamas. He was clumsy at it. He used words that were far too big. He tensed up every time one of them climbed into his lap without warning. But he tried. He kept trying, and when Wren fell asleep mid-battle against his arm, thumb in her mouth, he froze completely, staring down at the small warm weight against his chest like he was holding something made of glass. A tear rolled down his face and dropped onto her hair. Later, at the kitchen island, the girls demolished grilled cheese, and Julian barely touched his. He kept watching them, the way they argued over the blue cup, the way they laughed with their whole bodies. "They have your laugh," he said quietly. "They have your stubbornness," Nora said, "and your eyes. Everything else is mine, and I intend to keep it that way." Julian set down his sandwich. "Nora, I know I can't undo 4 years. I know what my mother is. Your mother is a woman who forged her dead husband's will and stole from a children's charity," Nora said. "I would call that more than difficult." "She's alone now," Julian said. "After the wedding, after the Devereaux family pulled every deal, the house just emptied out. Half the staff quit. She sits in the library and doesn't speak. She's terrified you'll take Cliffmore." "I might yet," Nora said. "I haven't decided." "She won't come near you or the girls," Julian said. "I told her that if she so much as sends a card, I am gone for good. I mean it. I don't want to be her puppet anymore." He looked at his daughters. "I missed everything. Their first words, first steps, all of it, because I was too much of a coward to stand up to her one time." "You're here now," Nora said. "It was not forgiveness, but it was not the door closing either. Don't promise them forever, Julian. Nobody that age understands forever. Just promise them Saturday, and then actually show up." "Saturday," Julian said. "Every Saturday. I'll move here if I have to." "Let's start with 1, Nora said. When the girls crashed for their nap, Julian carried Juniper to her bed, moving with the careful terror of a man defusing a bomb, and set her down like she might shatter. He stood in the doorway a long moment watching the blankets rise and fall. "Thank you," he whispered to Nora in the hall, "for letting me in today. You didn't have to." "I didn't do it for you," Nora said. "I did it for them. Every kid deserves to know where they come from, even if they choose to build somewhere else." They walked to the elevator. Julian pulled his new sneakers back on. He looked exhausted and rumpled, and more like a real person than he ever had in a tuxedo. "Same time next week?" he asked, and there was a wobble of doubt in it. Nora looked at him and saw, buried under all the fear and all the years, some trace of the man she had once loved before his mother got her hooks all the way in. "Same time," she said. "And Julian, leave the dolls at home. Bring dinosaurs." Julian laughed, a real one, and the doors slid shut on it. The story of Nora Kessler and the 2 Ashford girls did not end with a wrecked wedding or a courtroom. It ended quietly, which was somehow better. Over the next year, Julian became a fixture in San Francisco. He was clumsy at first, and then less so. He learned which one hated the crust cut off and which one insisted on it. He moved to the city for good and left the cold halls of Cliffmore behind him without looking back. He never became the father of the year. He became something more useful, which was a father who was actually there. Beatrice stayed at Cliffmore, a bitter queen in a mortgaged castle, living on an allowance her son sent, and the mercy of the woman she had once tried to erase. She never met the girls. Nora never allowed it, and after a while, Julian stopped asking on her behalf. The girls grew up knowing they were loved for exactly who they were, not for a name on a building. They had their father's gray eyes and their mother's refusal to be told no, and that second thing was going to serve them a great deal better than the first, and Nora kept climbing. She proved the thing she had always believed, which is that the best revenge is not screaming in a courtroom or throwing a scene at a party. The best revenge is building a life so full and so good that the people who once tried to break you end up as a single sad paragraph in the story of your success. She did not need $1 of the Ashford fortune. She had built her own, and in the end, that was the loudest thing she ever said. And that's where we'll leave it. I think we can all agree Nora handled that with more grace than most of us would have managed. It's a good reminder that you should never write someone off just because you caught them at their lowest point. People rebuild. Sometimes they rebuild into something you can't afford. If you enjoyed this one, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really does help the channel more than you'd think. And I want to hear from you in the comments. If you were Nora, would you have let Julian back in to see the girls, or would you have kept that door shut for good? There's no wrong answer, and I read every single comment. Make sure you're subscribed and that the bell is on, because next week I've got a good one. A woman gets fired by the company her own grandfather founded and shows up 3 months later as the person buying it. You won't want to miss that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.